Are you a life science professional? Stay on top of things and keep up with the rapid changes and innovations within the industry. Value Do engages with experts and peers on various life sciences topics. Join Life Sciences Value Share today.
Hi, everyone. I'm your host, Gaurav Kandhari. I'm very excited to have an industry leader and a very close friend on the show today. She's a pharma executive for the past 20 years, with experience in a variety of positions in US, ex-US, and global, both in the R&D and the commercial side of the organizations. And her predominant focus has been oncology and immuno-oncology. I've had the privilege of working with her and helping her stand up an oncology organization, and then working on launching brands and doing strategy and operational excellence exercises for her and for her team. A warm welcome to Michelle Werner. Welcome, Michelle. Thanks for taking the time.
Thanks, Gaurav. It's a real pleasure to be here with you today.
Thank you. How do you feel?
I feel great. I'm excited to be here.
Cool. So, friends, Michelle and I will kick off the discussion on the topic evolving world of oncology and how life sciences companies can be more agile and effective in launching oncology drugs and shaping the oncology business organizations and business units better. We plan to cover this topic in 3 episodes, starting with an overview on the topic, getting into the patient, HCP, and payer perspective around the topic, and then getting close and more inward into how oncology business units are led and managed, and getting finally into a 3rd episode around the go-to-market approaches. So, Michelle, any thoughts before we dive in?
Well, I think this is a really exciting topic, and having done a multitude of launches over the course of the last 20 years that I've been in this industry, I've seen it evolve during this time. And so I think there are great lessons learned from these experiences, but also opportunities for us to do more for patients, do more for our physicians that we partner with, and to help ready organizations to prepare. So this will be fun.
Absolutely. You read my mind. Very excited. So let's jump in. So Michelle, tell us a bit about your oncology journey, and how do you feel the oncology world has evolved over the last decade or so, on HCP, patient, and for life sciences organization?
So I think there's been a great number of changes over the course of the last decade or two. We used to be in a world where oncology launches were relatively few and far between, and first in class typically always meant best in class and maybe only in class. And we're now in an environment where that's no longer the case. I call this the golden age of innovation in oncology. And right now we're seeing so many more medicines that are being approved off of limited data sets and getting accelerated approvals. But we're also seeing extremely robust lifecycle management plans, which means that you're constantly in a state of launch with many of these medicines. You may have just brought a first indication to the market when you really are basically turning around and starting to prepare for your next, and a new launch is just around the corner. And that adds a lot of excitement, of course, first and foremost for patients who might be able to benefit from the innovations, but then also some complexity in terms of how do you prepare, how do you get ready from an external perspective, but also how do you get ready from an internal perspective. And so times are different now than it was when I first started in this field. But I also think that complexity brings a lot of excitement as well. And I think that's why certainly I do what I do every day.
Absolutely. I mean, so you sort of provided a great overview to the entire topic, and I love the way you phrased it, the constant state of launch and what it means for the for primarily the patient. So let's try to kind of cover that aspect of the topic. What does it mean for the patient, and then subsequently for the HCP or the payer? What does that mean for them?
So I think first and foremost, I mean, one of the great things about having choice or having many is that you have many options, right? There's not necessarily one single best way in order to be able to address, the mass numbers of patients with a particular type of cancer. Now we're in a world where we have many more targeted therapies. It's really important for us to understand whether or not there's any specific characteristics about a patient's cancer that might lead the patient in a down one journey versus another journey. And that means that we have, I believe, this, I'd say, responsibility to make sure that there's a good level of education and support to navigate the key questions. I mean, some really difficult questions that any person goes through when they're initially diagnosed with a specific type of cancer. Many things go through a patient's head in particular. And oftentimes what we're hearing is, a patient sits there in the doctor's office or gets that phone call that then nobody ever wants to get. And you really just hear one thing, that they have cancer, but they don't hear anything else. And like all of us, right, our minds can race to a million different places, most of which are probably not very good, right? And so for us, what I think is really important and how I think about things is what's the support that we need to, that we should be giving patients in order to be able to make sure that they get the right information, that they can be well informed about what their options are, that they're really being a thought partner with their doctor, and not just being a recipient of news and a plan that they don't play a role in. And so I think that's how it was really, 10, 20 years ago. You just did whatever your doctor told you to do. But now we're really in a different world where patients are much more hands-on, they're much more involved. And because of that, they need to be more informed, and they want to be more informed and more engaged. And I think that we have a responsibility to help make sure that they get the best information and the most current information there is. I will also say it comes with a flip side, right? Because it's a very overwhelming time, and giving too much information also is not the best approach, right? So it's really striking the right balance where they have just enough so they can really engage in a dialogue and be informed, but not too much where they just don't even know where to start.
Yeah, so tell us more about that. So totally agree with the first side where things have evolved. The internet has taken over. Everybody has information on their fingertips. But I get a feeling, and I was reading this somewhere, the phrase that the patients are drinking right from the fire hose, I think applies well here. So much information, so much digital content, so many credible sites, but they do not all tell the same story. And I've been a caregiver myself to a cancer patient. So I think when you were talking about the cancer patient sitting in the lobby, I've been there with being a caregiver. So I totally realize how quickly you get overwhelmed, even when you know this space well. So tell us a bit more about any stories that you want to share, any experiences you want to share as to how you streamline that experience for a patient, when you thought either at the unbranded level or the branded level, there was just too much information that we were throwing at the patient and the patient caregiver, and we had to kind of crystallize that story a bit to do justice to that point. Any thoughts, any stories?
Well, what I would say is, I guess, I mean, maybe not so much of a story, but a lesson, right? I think that all of us who have been in this industry for some time, I think, can really fall into the trap of, well, we know things best because we're living it every day, and therefore, all the content that we're going to create is going to be the best that a patient will have access to. And in some ways, some of that is true, but in other ways, I'm not so sure. One of the things that I would say is, from a lesson perspective, that I've learned over time is that even as a representative of the pharmaceutical industry, I'm not sure if getting content directly from us necessarily is the right approach. I believe that working and partnering with trusted sources like patient advocacy groups is really the best way in order to use that as a channel in which information can be disseminated. I mean, this is where the patients are going anyway, because not only are they looking for information about the treatment options that are available, but they're also looking for information about, like, what's the process look like? What do they need to do to get diagnosed? Are there other options that are not interventional in nature? And the holistic approach, is really what's required at this time. I mean, patients are thinking about so many different things. Will I be able to continue working? Is this going to have an impact on my financial situation? Lots of different things. And so for me, it's really about how can we best partner with the groups who are already well established with these groups of patients, and who already know, like, these are the things that patients need to hear. This is the type of language that helps them understand and appreciate the information as best as they possibly can. And it also gives them the opportunity to really connect with other people who have similar experiences, which is very different. I mean, Gaurav, you talk about your own experience as a caregiver, and I think that means a lot to patients and to families, right, when they're in these situations. Correct. And I will say that certainly for myself as well, in my own personal experiences as a caregiver, not to a cancer patient, but for somebody with a rare condition, this is exactly what you need. You need to talk to other families who are going through something similar to know that it's okay, and what they're doing is right, and that there are options, and there's reason to have hope, and there's reason to believe, and that there's reasons for them to be optimistic about what the outcomes are going to be. Right. So I think for me, the real lesson is, don't try to do everything that you can just because you can do it. Think about the right people and organizations that we should be partnering with in order to make this as accessible and approachable for the people who truly matter. And in this case, we're talking about the patients.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, that's very helpful, Michelle. And, it takes me back to, a few years early when you evolved the patient side of the organization to a different level. It was not just content, but I think the mindset of how a pharma company or a life sciences organization should be looking at the patient, you kind of evolved that landscape. Can you talk a little bit more about, beyond patient association groups, beyond the right stakeholders to get in front of patients, beyond the content? What are the couple of other things that are required to make the process and the journey, out of the patient easier or streamlined?
Yeah, so I would say, maybe just one story to share with you.
Sure.
I was working on an asset that was being explored for mesothelioma at one point in my career. And one of the things that we really recognized about this patient population is quite different than, patients who have different, certainly broad kind of categories of lung cancer, et cetera. And it's a relatively uncommon condition. And we really wanted to go through an experience where we truly understood what the needs were of this patient population. And instead of us, doing lots of market research and, maybe more conventional insight generation, that is what is typical for a pharmaceutical company. We ended up doing sessions where we would actually co-create directly with patients. We actually brought patients and caregivers of patients with mesothelioma together in order to really work hand in hand, side by side, to really understand, okay, we are thinking about entering into this space. We're interested in what the needs are of you as patients, not just from a treatment perspective, but from an overall, diagnosis and, just navigating what the next steps in their lives are. And the co-creation directly with them was really eye-opening, because things that we went into that conversation, ideas that we were brainstorming already, entering into those sessions, were actually fundamentally different than what we walked out of the room with. Because at some point, you feel like you have the insights that you need in order to be able to, come up with your strategy or come up with your plan. But the fact of the matter is you can't really put yourselves in the shoes of the patient at all, right? You just can't. As much as we think we can, we really don't have that skill. And so everything is different. You think about things fundamentally differently. And so I really believe that the co-creation it certainly has changed the way that I do things. And from that moment in time, it was just so eye-opening that I've always incorporated co-creation now as part of the way that I and my teams approach our content creation. The other thing that I would say is also quite interesting, and I think for us as a pharmaceutical sector, generally we get really stuck on, what do we need to do to be thinking about how patients get access to or interact with the medicine that we as manufacturers produce. Fact of the matter is that the journey that a patient goes through is far more extensive than just when they, get a medicine.
Correct.
It's much more than that. But until you actually think about what those pain points are in the journey, you don't, and you really need to hear them from patients, you might be missing some major things. So for example, if you operate in a country where, or if you're working on a condition that is really, I'd say, a relatively smaller cancer type, where it's maybe not treated by like your regular community oncologist, but you really have to be treated in a center of excellence because that's where the expertise is. Oftentimes, patients have to drive 3, 4, 5, 6 hours, right, to get to the clinics where they can be seen. But if we're not thinking about that experience or the challenges that maybe that patient might have by thinking about just how do I get from my house to the place of care, you're missing out on a huge piece of the puzzle from a patient perspective. Right. And so I would really like to see us be more thoughtful about what's the entirety of that experience looking like, and what do we have a responsibility for? Where can we make that experience as much as best as it possibly can be?
No, absolutely. I mean, I think that is very powerful, because I think we understand that pharmaceutical sector is a for-profit business, and they are doing their bit to get the medicines faster to the patients, but they have the power. And if there's a consortium that thinks of the patient like this, if everybody contributes to that overall holistic experience, obviously it's sort of life-changing for a patient. Because I remember as a caregiver, medicine was not even 1% of the worry, because we knew once we got to the place, if there is availability, we'll get the medicine. So the overall experience, and I mean, I was exactly in the same position. We had to drive like 2.5 hours to get to this oncology center of excellence versus just a clinic or a hospital. And that experience is long lasting for a patient, and that is worrisome, and then the patient is frail, is not really able to kind of take that 4-hour journey in a day. So, and if anything that could be done to simplify that, or to make the customer and the patient and the caregiver a bit more comfortable, that's very powerful. So that's very helpful, Michelle. Let's take a pause. Let's talk about maybe the healthcare provider and the payer. Maybe I know they are not they go hand in hand. So I do not wish to separate it till you feel that we need to kind of talk separately about them. So what is the payer and the healthcare perspective around the patient in this? I mean, specifically, I want to kind of stay close to the topic, oncology world. How is that evolved, and what are the things that pharma companies and life sciences organizations need to do?
So, I mean, maybe let's think about clinicians first, right?
Sure.
And so for me, one of the things that I've really recognized as evolving over time is, especially we talked about this constant state of launch in oncology, and, with robust life cycle management plans, having multiple maybe new indications, going into second line, moving into first line, going into one tumor type, but then, being able to be used in another tumor type, all happening in a short period of time. I mean, one of the things that I think, you talk about what's overwhelming, right? At least one patient has one diagnosis, and that's what they can focus on. If you're an oncologist in this day and age, especially a general oncologist where you treat patients with so many different types of cancer,
Yeah.
This is really tough, right?
Correct.
Because as quickly as medicines come to market, as new approvals come out, it's almost as if it's outdated or obsolete data. There's something new to be thinking about, new data sets, new information. The standard of care is in a constant state of evolution. It's really tough, right, to keep up with that. And so one of the things that I think is really important for us to be thoughtful of as a pharmaceutical sector is, what can we do? Again, what's our responsibility that we have to make information be as easy to access as possible, as easy to digest as possible, and that physicians have it at their fingertips, really, in order to be able to have the information they need really right at the right time, at the right place, at the point of care for a patient, so that they don't have to retain 100% of the knowledge at all times.
Right.
Because I think, like all of us, they're human beings, right? And us as human beings only have a certain capacity, right, for us to retain knowledge and information. And so for me, it's really been important to think about, what do we need to do to change the way it is that we interact with our customers so that they're not overwhelmed by all of the data, but that it is simple and easy to understand. They know exactly where to access it when they need to, and then can use it to make the appropriate informed choices on behalf of their patients.
Right. So let's kind of dig a bit deeper there. Any good examples or stories that come to mind where really we have improved on that experience? I totally agree that it's not only the cancer therapies. Now the cancer therapies have got like 6 or 7 different categories, and then there's targeted therapies. So understand we were talking about general oncologist, but it's kind of multifold, this entire sort of journey for clinicians and the referral pathways and all of that. So any interesting stories that come to mind where you felt you really moved the needle there, where you helped a clinician, or you saw a company or an effort that was done that really moved the needle on that front?
So I would say one of the evolutions that we've seen within the treatment landscape over the course of the last decade or so, which I believe has come as a result, in particular, because of this constant state of evolution of launches and data in the oncology space, is really the role of the multidisciplinary team. And especially in the oncology practice, where less frequently it's like one medicine, one disease, it's multiple medicines, maybe multiple modalities used in combination with each other in order to treat a particular condition. The multidisciplinary team absolutely had to come together in order to make sure that the patients have the opportunity to have the input by all the different specialties and disciplines at the same time. And I do think that we as an industry have really helped these multidisciplinary teams come together, especially when you're talking about combinations of, chemotherapies, first with radiotherapies and now immunotherapies in combination with chemotherapies and radiotherapies, right? This had to happen because we really needed to have the multidisciplinary teams chart a course for a patient from the beginning all the way to, thinking through what the multiple lines of therapy might be as a patient navigates through that journey. And I would say that has really fundamentally changed the way that patients are being treated now than perhaps that they've had to before. And again, when your patient case is being discussed by the multidisciplinary team, again, going back to the same, challenge of how do you stay on top of all the information and the content? The multidisciplinary team has that shared responsibility. And when you have multiple people who are really like the expert in a specific area and can provide input into that decision, the burden or the responsibility on any one oncologist is less because you've got a team of practitioners who are really working together in order to make sure that the patients get the best option, have the best options made available to them.
Right. So, going one level below, what do you think are the implementation challenges to really executing on a good multidisciplinary team and the objectives and goals that are truly beneficial to the clinician and the patient? So what are some of the challenges or a couple of challenges that you've either faced yourself or seen in implementing a true multidisciplinary team?
I think I will tell you, definitely the multidisciplinary team in and of itself has had various levels of success and implementation in different parts of the world. We've seen great utilization of multidisciplinary teams in the United States. We see that in some other countries outside of the US, but it's not universally been adopted, right? And so I'd say some of the big challenges perhaps has been just getting these up and running, really working with the institutions, getting them to understand the value and the benefit of thinking differently about how they approach patients. It also means that, in some ways you move slightly away from, an individualized patient kind of care and decision to clustering or grouping patients together so that there's a special clinic where types of patients are being seen at one time. So therefore the whole multidisciplinary team that really specializes on that type of patient can discuss that whole workload at one time. And that means different things in terms of way that patients are scheduled in the clinic and when they come in for their appointments. And I think that actually has changed even the way that that practices, institutions really think about, like, how do they need to organize themselves? What are the administrative changes that they need to make on their end in order to be ready for this type of approach, which could be quite different? Because those are the days that they say that we're going to do our immunotherapy infusions on this particular day, or we're going to have our lung cancer clinics on this particular day, because that means they can organize all the physicians that are necessary to be there for those patients at those moments in time, in a different way. I think that's actually really great in some ways, because then at least you feel from a patient perspective, like, you're part of a group, you're part of a team, you've got a team that's supporting you, but you also have a lot of fellow patients who are going through something similar. I've personally been in many oncology clinics over the course of my career, and I will tell you it's quite inspiring and motivating when you're in the clinic with patients, and the patients are actually speaking to each other as friends and as comrades, and having that support system even while they might be receiving their infusion.
Right.
So that's been really great to see over the course of my time here in this space.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, I think there are a couple of other things that come to mind. How does a life sciences organization and an oncology business unit in a pharma organization overlay this entire clinician journey on top of the patient journey to make sure that all these gaps that are identified on the patient journey can be actually overlaid by what a multidisciplinary team could help with. I guess that is where some of these aha moments can be created. That we have found something that is truly a value to not even the clinician but also the patient. So one more thing that comes to mind when you were talking about that experience of patient communities. Quickly, I know we'll talk about this in the other episode of how to kind of make the OBUs more agile. But what is the role of digital or specifically social media been in those patient communities? Do you think they are adding value, or they are just not that relevant to our industry?
I think they're adding value big time, and quite frankly, I think that social media channels are probably becoming the number one source of information and support for patients. I certainly say that as a caregiver for somebody with a rare condition. That's exactly where I'm going to find other parents like myself, to find information about other people's experiences with this condition. So, and I think we see exactly the same thing in the oncology space. This has changed dramatically in the last, certainly 5 years. And even Gaurav, if we just look at the last 12 months since we've been living under the COVID-19 pandemic, this has been now exponentially grown even more. So the digital channels, I'd say, is going to become the primary place for information. It certainly is becoming that way as well. When I think about just what I was saying, the importance for us to make data and information easy to access and easy to digest, the digital channels is really the number one place where we have to get it right, because that's what is going to be leveraged at that moment during the point of care.
Right.
And so for me, this has become a much clearer focus in what we from a pharmaceutical industry need to be doing in order to make sure that we, quite frankly, are just staying relevant for our customers and relevant for patients as well.
Cool. No, thank you, Michelle. And I want to be respectful of your time today. So let's quickly talk about the payer side. How has that evolved over a decade? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think it's certainly has evolved, and again, a lot of this has happened with the golden age of innovation within oncology, as I've mentioned. I mean, we've been in a world where we've had access to lots of chemotherapies, and unfortunately, right? I mean, there wasn't a lot of innovation for an extended period of time, and chemotherapy was pretty much it for the vast majority of patients. Fortunately, that's changed, right? And now there's been the introduction of many small molecules, many targeted therapies. And from a payer perspective, this obviously introduces some different challenges that we as an industry also need to think about addressing. But then also in the more recent years, a huge number of biologics, especially immunotherapies, being introduced. Really the way that these medicines are, how practices plan for them, how they can afford them. I mean, the payment models that are used in order to reimburse both patients for out-of-pocket costs, but also clinicians for the costs that they carry on their end is fundamentally different, and they've become much more complex. I mean, from a practice perspective, we're seeing a huge burden put on practices in order to get pre-authorizations for medicines to get reimbursed. And that adds a huge administrative load to those practices. And every time that physicians or practices are focused on trying to overcome the payer sort of challenges or the reimbursement challenges, it takes away time that they have to be treating patients or to be, staying up to speed and current on what's happening in that area. And so for us as an industry, I mean, this has also changed the way that we're thinking about, like, what do we need to do to prepare to make sure that in the US that there's coverage where it needs to get coverage, that we're generating the data that's needed in order to support government reimbursement in those countries outside of the US. We're thinking about whole different ways of the role of real world evidence, the role of patient reported outcomes, and how do we need to leverage all of that information in order to build a strong and robust value story for the medicine. Certainly, I would say, and we'll probably talk about this in some of the subsequent sessions, it's influenced a lot about how we organize ourselves as a company to think about what are the teams and the structures that we need to be putting in place in order to be able to prepare for the increasing needs that there are from a payer perspective that's really necessary in order to make sure that there are no hurdles that get in the way of having patients be able to access medicines. It's not the same anymore where you'd just be able to do a registrational clinical trial and that would be sufficient, and the medicine will get approved by the health authorities and the medicine will get reimbursed. It's not that easy anymore.
Yeah.
And in some ways, that's a good thing because it's making us be more thorough and robust in our planning. But I think it's also making sure that we're continuously generating data and information to support why these innovations are so important for patients.
Yeah. And I mean, the other side of, the back end story within a pharma organization has evolved a lot as well. I mean, the focus, the effort, the resources that pharma organizations are putting in standing up these patient access and reimbursement organizations to support the patients, be it the size of the call center, be it the streamlining of the content and the conversation that is happening with payers and with patients is evolved multifolds as well. From it being like a small group, which is like a formality, to it becoming like a strong arm of a pharma organization, because that is where the true value to the patient and the payer lies, right? I guess if you can streamline that process, we know about the paperwork, right? So the paper trail, the bureaucracy, if we can kind of simplify it for the patients and the payers, it's a win-win for everybody, right? I guess, the patient gets the drug in time, the right drug, and gets a reimbursement. So as simple as that. Achieve the key goals, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, good. So this has been a great conversation, Michelle. So I think we did justice to the first aspect of the topic. How we spoke about how the oncology world has evolved and what does it mean to the patient, the clinician, and the payer, and a few kind of nuggets about how pharma companies are and could do better to serve these three audiences and customers better. So before we close this, I just wanted to kind of ask you one question. Any one aha moment that comes to mind from your entire oncology journey? It does not have to be super relevant to this topic, but I'm just kind of, from an evolution perspective, any aha moment that sort of changed how you started thinking, or you at least changed the course, anything that comes to mind?
I think what it just comes down to is maybe something that I alluded to earlier in our chat today, is that I think sometimes we can fall into the trap of, thinking that we're the experts here. Fact of the matter is that we're not. And I think the faster that we get to a place where we realize that we're really not the experts in the room, the better it is, or the easier it is that we're going to be able to actually add value, right? So we start doing a little bit more listening, right? This to me has been the biggest lesson. Listen more, talk less, and then we'll be able to do better things together.
Super. Now that's a nice way to close it, Michelle. And thank you, viewers, for joining the show today. So we have, like I said, this is the first of the three episodes. The following episode, we are going to talk speak to Michelle about what is the inward view. How should a oncology business unit operate, and what can an organization do to be a bit more agile, to be a bit more streamlined, and how can we learn from the multiple launches and the indications and the constant state of launch that Michelle referred to. Thank you, Michelle, for joining.
Thanks. It was a pleasure. I look forward to the next time, Gaurav.
Thank you. You have a good one.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Life Sciences Value Share with Gaurav Kandari. We invite you to visit valuedoconsulting.com/podcast for additional resources and to access the notes to today's episode. Join us again soon and invite your peers and colleagues.